As a product, LEGO is about one thing: assembly. That's why this instruction step is so surprising. Yeah, those are scissors telling you to cut this LEGO piece in half. Why would LEGO include a step like this? And how many other LEGO sets require you to use scissors? Let's find out. This step is from the Technic snowmobile set released in 2007 and requires one of these red corrugated pipes. This LEGO element is a hollow tube piece with ridges, and these ones in particular that span 14 studs in length are pretty rare, having only appeared in a total of 33 sets since 1998, of which only a handful of them come in red. So what's going on here, and why would LEGO ever ask a builder to cut a piece? Well, these corrugated pipes have been released in many different sizes over the years, from 2 stud long versions all the way up to 32 stud long versions. At the time that this set was released, LEGO had already been putting these parts in sets for several years, and was currently producing 7 stud long variants in a variety of colors. So why didn't they include 2 of these rather than cut a 14 stud pipe in half? Well, the problem is that LEGO had never made this length in red, and therefore LEGO decided the best course of action would be to add a piece that was double the length and ask builders to cut it in half to create these smaller pieces needed. This prevented LEGO from needing to incur the cost to produce a new color of this piece exclusively for this snowmobile set. This explains why most of the sets that feature these pipe pieces don't require scissors at all, such as the tow truck, which was released around the same time. This build comes with 4 of these pipes in black, which are directly placed onto the build, no cutting required. Nonetheless, there are other examples of LEGO cutting this piece, and they're a bit different. Just take a look at 2015's Race Truck set, which features a silver tube towards the back of the build. However, the piece that LEGO includes is actually too long. So LEGO included this instruction step telling builders to cut this piece to a very specific length and discard the rest. In fact, a similar step can be found in 2010's motorbike set on step 45, but this time you'll need to make this cut twice, and it's a very small amount to trim off each piece. The ending result looks and works great to connect the engine to the exhaust, but I'm sure this step caught a lot of LEGO fans off guard. It's particularly interesting that, unlike the snowmobile, which asked us to cut a piece into 2 and use both halves, these other steps ask builders to cut off a small portion, which is classified as scrap, and never used elsewhere in the build. I guess you could consider these scraps to be extra pieces, but with how rare these steps are, they're also a fun reward for discovering a set with such a rare step, since the vast majority of sets don't cut these pieces. Regardless, these aren't the only pieces that LEGO has forced builders to place between the blades of scissors. For example, check out the Seattle Space Needle set released in 2009. This set comes with 3 rigid hoses that each measure 24 studs long, which unfortunately is a little bit too long. I sure hope you have a pair of scissors lying around while building this set, because you'll need them. Builders will use this instructions page to measure the piece and give it a quick snip. Once again though, this raises the question of why not just use a shorter piece? These rigid hoses, just like corrugated pipes, have been released in all sorts of different sizes, ranging from 3 studs long to 66 studs long. But nonetheless, this wasn't adequate for this set. It seems that LEGO needed a very specific size for this particular build, so they reached for the scissors. One thing worth pointing out on all of these is the 1:1 scale on the side of each page. These graphics are super helpful anytime you're building a Technic set to ensure that you're using the correct piece, but in these steps, they're absolutely mandatory to make sure that you cut the piece to the correct size. If you cut a LEGO piece too short, it's game over. But it's not only pipes and hoses that LEGO has asked builders to cut. Back in 1989, LEGO began releasing the now legendary Pirates line, and with it, a few new ways of designing sets and instructions. One of the most famous sets from this era is the Black Seas Barracuda, with its 909 pieces and 8 minifigures, including the famous Captain Redbeard. As you can probably tell from the pictures, these old pirate ships came with several large cloth sails. However, builders may have been a little bit surprised when they dumped out their pieces to find 2 large pieces of fabric that were meant to be cut into smaller pieces. You can see that the instructions once again included a scissors icon indicating that these pieces needed to be cut. In the end, you'll wind up with 5 smaller sails cut from the 2 larger pieces of cloth. A similar setup can be found in the Caribbean Clipper set released that same year. This set was much smaller, with only 378 parts and 3 cloth sails. Those sails, though, came in a single piece, which was identical to the sails from the Black Sea's Barracuda, but in blue instead of red. Once again, the instructions included this image telling builders to cut these pieces apart. From a production standpoint, this makes a bit more sense than the pipes and hoses mentioned earlier, though it is still a little bit confusing. Obviously, LEGO has the means to cut these sails to any shape they want in their factories, but this was most likely a very strategic design choice to make the manufacturing and packaging of these sets easier. It's significantly easier to include 2 large fabric pieces than 5 individually die-cut fabric sails that are small, light, and loose in the box. However, there's yet another piece that's been getting cut up in LEGO sets for more than 10 years: strings. While strings and ropes aren't super common in sets these days, they have been popping up in LEGO builds since the 1970s and even predate modern minifigures. In that time, LEGO strings have been released in almost every length imaginable, including this absolutely massive roll that spans 650 centimeters or 21 feet, which came with the equally large crawler crane set. This particular set doesn't require the string to be cut, but you do need to do some wild weaving to get everything working properly. This instruction step is crazy. Nevertheless, several smaller LEGO sets have required builders to cut some strings down to size. As one example, the Arctic Base Camp set from 2014 includes one of these 50-centimeter strings. On page 29 of the instructions, you'll need to unwind this string and measure out 30 centimeters or 12 inches and make a single cut. Unlike the pipes and hoses from earlier, this instruction step doesn't actually give you a 1-to-1 scale to compare to and measure, since this small instruction booklet likely isn't even large enough for that. Instead, you're given this small diagram with these very small numbers. So I guess for this step, you'll need scissors and something to measure with. In fact, we see almost the exact same thing in the instructions for 2013's Coast Guard plane set. On this step, you'll once again need to cut the 50-centimeter string down to 30 centimeters, and get this, on the very next page you'll need to do it again thanks to that beautiful 2x. What's extra strange with these is that LEGO has actually released these same strings in a shorter 30-centimeter length in a handful of sets. That's the exact length that these sets call for, so why not include it? Well, this time there's a pretty obvious answer because LEGO stopped making these shorter strings after 2011, which is actually a few years before these sets were released, so all LEGO could do was include the longer version and force builders to cut it. But that doesn't mean that LEGO designers didn't get creative with this extra long string length. The coolest example that I could find of these strings being cut down to size is in the incredibly nostalgic Battle for Ninjago City set, released in 2014. This set comes with one of these 50-centimeter strings, and also requires you to cut it, but it goes about things a little bit differently. For starters, it actually does give us a 1-to-1 image to measure against instead of making us find a ruler. They managed to fit it in by coiling up the string and pulling off exactly as much as needed to help builders get the right size. A super clever way of handling things. But the really neat thing is on the very next step, that shows that we'll actually use both of these strings, one as a zip line and the other as a grappling hook. This clever strategy doesn't result in any waste, so that's really cool to see from LEGO. Moving on, there's a LEGO piece that's been sliced more than any other, the pneumatic hose. Now, if you've never seen any of the old pneumatic LEGO sets, they're worth checking out. In short, these were old Technic sets starting in 1984 that used a series of flexible hollow tubes and small air pumps to force movement using compressed air. Much like the hoses and corrugated pipes from earlier, these pneumatic tubes have been released in sizes ranging from only 2 studs long all the way up to a staggering 535 stud length. This was only ever included in a single product, the Technology Resource Set from 1994. Obviously, a tube this long was meant to be cut, but LEGO gave no instructions for this one since it was for school programs and summer camps to teach various STEM topics. However, there have been several sets released over the years that do require builders to trim these tubes down. Just take a look at the Excavator, one of the very first sets to use these pieces from 1984. When this set was initially released, it included one of these 122 stud-long hoses, as well as a few other smaller ones. This build did require fans to cut this single tube into very specific sizes, but it did things a little bit differently. Instead of providing a 1-to-1 scale image, this set had an actual ruler printed at the bottom of the first page. As odd as that might seem, this was actually pretty common with these sets, and we can see the same solution in sets like 1992's AirTech Claw Rig, which included some seriously complex wiring. Additionally, the Search sub from 1997 also included a ruler, though this set was a bit more simple overall. However, the worst offender by far has got to be 2003's backhoe set. This set came with a single massive roll of pneumatic hose that stretched 406 studs long, and every builder would need to spend quite a long time cutting it up just to prepare for the building process. Just take a look at page 3 of the instructions and you'll notice this organized cut list and a ruler. You'll need to take that single massive tube roll and carefully slice it into a few dozen smaller pieces. Once you cut, you can't go back, so this could be quite a stressful experience. These pieces get used throughout the entire build, but just take a look at step 52 for one of the wildest examples of instruction steps that use cut pieces. Moving on, one of these sets tried something unique. 1999's Formula Flash came with one of these 52 stud-long hoses, but unlike the other sets of the era, it didn't include a ruler. Instead, these instructions simply showed you a 1-to-1 image of the size that you needed in that step, and let you cut these pieces off of the larger tube as needed as you built the set, as opposed to cutting everything before you even started. Luckily, LEGO seems to have moved away from this design philosophy with pneumatic sets, because newer pneumatic sets, such as 2016's Volvo Excavator, are far more straightforward with far less cutting. While the instructions still call for several pneumatic tubes in very specific lengths, this set comes with all of these tubes pre-cut, which certainly provides some peace of mind by eliminating the possibility of cutting a piece too short and completely messing up your LEGO set. Now, there's another instance where LEGO seemingly told builders to cut pieces by mistake. Just take a look at this image. It looks like LEGO is telling you to cut 4 of these telescope pieces. What's going on here, and what set is this? Well, I talk about this and many other weird instruction mistakes in this video. Click here right now to watch, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more LEGO videos.